Hello everyone. Today we're going to be taking a look at Squadron Strike, a space strategy game by Ken Burnside of Ad Astra Games. Squadron Strike purports to be a sandbox game where you can battle any science fiction universes against other science fiction universes completely in 3 dimensions. We're going to have a couple limitations here because we're going to be working in tabletop sim, but there actually is a neat web-based application that can do a lot of the calculations you're going to see today and actually provide you with a little bit of that 3D as well. The base game itself comes with sort of like a default setting where basically you take all the countries of Earth and kind of give them spacecraft, kind of an AD 2101 or something like that. I forget exactly what it is, but or something like Freelancer kind of a game. It's neat ships. They'll have a neat variety of different tools and weapons and kind of tactics and stuff like that. But there also is a licensed traveler product that came out fairly recently, as well as two basically knockoff of other very, very well-known science fiction universes out there that are worth checking out. It's kind of cool. So today what we're going to be doing is basically going to be doing an overview of the entire game, kind of how I play it, some like the mechanics, the SSD, things like that, without getting too crazy. We're going to save some of the nitty gritty for actual combat in that particular situation. So basically, in this situation, we have a couple of North Area cutters. Now, North Area is probably familiar with people who know stuff about the NTTR. There's also South Area and East Area, West Area. You know, it's basically fake countries kind of a thing. And you have these two cutters that are basically meeting themselves. I built these guys in Blender with the help of some of the graphics that actually come with the box. If you take a closer look, you realize this is PF Sloan. These are traveler models. I wasn't about to quickly redraw my entire own, so I just kind of borrowed them and just kind of marked them up just a little bit like there. So basically, in my mind, a cutter in a space universe would basically be something that it can get into orbit. It's pretty quick for dealing with like customs and stuff like that, but you're not going to really want to be getting in an extended fight with it, which actually works really well for us. Both these spacecraft, by the way, were built using the tools inside of the game in a spreadsheet that they give you when you get the box set. So they're kind of designed for our needs today. So now let's go ahead and take a look at the SSD. So each one of these ships is going to have this little guy called an SSD. Very small ships. You actually get 2 up on one sheet. And my understanding is they're actually working on making one that has 3 up on one sheet as well, which is actually pretty cool. So basically, starting up at the top left, you have all of our different arcs for taking damage. You can see in this particular case that we have a series of little shield bubbles. These are blade of shields. And we also have a bit of armor. So if we were to get hit in the front, it would have to get through all this to actually get through the good stuff. Now these guys 1 through 10 are actual hit locations. So when you take a hit, you would roll these dice to see where the actual hit happens. And then of course there's little damage within here and stuff like that. Other details we get is we have our pivot rating if we want to change the pointing of the nose. We have a roll rating if we want to roll. You can play this entire game for a lifetime without ever having to roll. That being said, sometimes there's an advantage, especially if you're trying to bring an arc to bear or something like that. We have our bridge. Of course, if anything bad happens with the bridge, you know what happens with the rest of the ship. And of course, we have our actual thrust. And you'll notice this is movement mode 2 right here. Movement mode 2 is tricky because you're going to be using vectors for movement. And you're not going to be able to stop without canceling out whatever speed you've accumulated in one direction, which can get very complicated very quickly, but it's also amazing because it's the most realistic form of movement. There's also mode 1 and there's also a mode 0 movement, but we'll take a look at that in a separate video. Making our way up here, we have our firing arcs. It looks a little confusing, but it's actually really not that bad. Basically, you have the name of the weapon as well as what arc it can fire in. In this looks like a nose arc. You can see the little nose parked right here. You can see that we have an AFB, which is an anti-fighter beam. We have an SF, which is a standard flak weapon, as well as these two guys in the back. And we also have this thing called an MX-50, which is basically a missile system. It's a 50mm missile. It's nothing too crazy. And you can see it can basically attack anything off the nose directly. But this will make a little more sense in a little while later on. Coming up here, we have our action points. This universe is cool because for those of you who play games like Starfleet Battles, you're familiar with the energy points and allocation and stuff like that. In this game, it basically rounds up all those different mechanics into sort of universal action point. Anything that's shaded in requires action points to do. You'll notice that if you take a look, for example, at my anti-fighter beam, it requires a single action point to fire at any of these range brackets. If you're doing something like entering FTL, that also requires it. If you're going to be doing some damage control and things like that, you can also use all your action points to do so, which is pretty cool. So you can also see we have, of course, a little bit of cooldown, but we'll deal with that a little later. Flipping over to the other side, This is our Cutter Mark II. He's slightly different than the other one. You notice his shields have circles and it has a square. These are deflector shields. What the square basically does is it acts as damage reduction before it gets applied to the rest of the shields. This is a neat way to do it. He's also got some general shield regeneration here. He's got the same amount of structural integrity. His speed is basically exactly the same. He has the 2 action points. He has the anti-fighter beam, and he's given up his flak weapon, finger quotes right there, so that he can have a little bit better of a shield system that's going to give him a little bit more damage absorption before it actually gets through. As a consequence, of course, he is going to require 2 action points to actually fire any of his missiles, and he's only got the little anti-fighter beams. Granted, he's got 2 of them, which would mean it would take 2 action points to fire through the nose. So it's going to make things very, very interesting. Other tools that I have sitting out on the table today, I have this guy right here. This is a movement card. It looks pretty scary, but it's actually really not that bad, and you'll see what I mean in just a minute. And then coming down here, we have kind of the universal sequence of play kind of reference sheet. It's actually a 2-sider. When you look at the back, you get the sequence of play, and you got all sorts of things with intercepts and inherited velocity for firing torpedoes. You have some evasion. It looks bad, but it's really not that bad, unless, of course, you're trying to do anything with a tractor beam. But we'll definitely save that for another day. So anyway, let's go ahead and start and do a basic, quick little run through of a quick turn, just so you can kind of see what everything looks like. So the turn procedure itself is pretty straightforward. What we like to do is we like to begin by rolling our aggression checks. So what is an aggression check? Basically, what you're going to do is take the crew quality, roll it on a d10. If you get the crew quality or better, then you have the ability to target anything you want in the field. Now, why does this matter? Well, in a game where there's only one target, it doesn't matter who you target. But if you had a situation that was like this, a little bit mixed up here. There we go. There we go. We had something like this going on, but this guy was a little tiny fighter, and this guy was a big scary capital ship, and we wanted to attack the big scary capital ship. If we fail our aggression roll, we could only attack this guy who's physically closer. So that definitely can lead to some consequences in bigger games, but that's not really going to affect us too much here. Next, what we do is we like to update our AVID, plot our pivot, and roll. So let's go ahead and look at the AVID for a second here. So this is one of those things that when you first look at it, you're like, well, what am I looking at? But as you kind of get the hang of it, it gets much, much, much simpler to understand. And you'll see exactly what I mean in a second. It's really not that bad. Anybody played any war games with ships and things like that is probably pretty familiar with something like this. This is just a little bit more in depth, as you'll see in just a minute. So anyway, basically what we're going to do with this tool is we're going to plot the position of our ship relative to where it is. So right now, if you look at our ship, you can see this little triangle. If you look at the back of your ship, you can see a little half circle there. Looking all the way, if we were actually to flip the ship over, you would notice it's got a little anchor symbol on the bottom to represent the side. So what we do is we just transfer those symbols. Another way to think about this is basically have a giant circle, kind of if you want to imagine the top of this. The yellow ring being the outer ring of the circle, the blue ring kind of being the 30-degree, the green ring kind of being the 60-degree, and of course the red ring or the purple ring being vertical. In this particular case, we've already got a dot in it. So let's take a look at the ship, and let's see if we can determine where its nose would be. So first of all, we're not tilted, which means we're going to have all of our pieces, with the exception of our top and bottom, located on this ring representing sort of this plane, the flat main plane of the actual thing. This will become important when we do 3D movement later on. So first thing I'm going to do is draw the nose. So the symbol for the nose is a triangle. Does this make sense? Let's take a look. Let's see, the nose is definitely vertical. It's also definitely pointing off to the right, which would be the BC direction. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and draw our left. This will be our port side. Then we're going to go ahead and draw our starboard side, which is going to be the right. We're going to draw our aft. Now we're going to go ahead and draw where our top is. Where's our top? Well, it's facing vertically, which, like I said, you can play this game for a lifetime and never actually have to flip the ship over. Some people love flipping the ship over. Some people find it a little complicated. And of course, if we did actually have the bottom here, we'd be drawing it kind of like this. And then we would circle it to remind us that it's underneath. If you remember, it's going to be underneath. Let's go ahead and take a look at what this guy up here is going to be doing. So he's got the exact same situation. You'll notice this card, by the way, is reversed to make it a little bit easier to understand. So he's also facing the same direction that we're facing. So his right side, his starboard side, of course, is going to be facing this way. We always like to fill in that little triangle. and we know that his port side's that way. We know that his tail's kind of facing this way, and we know that his top is kind of sitting up here like this. So now if we look at it, we can understand exactly the orientation. So at this point, they're running parallel to each other, and if you actually look, they are running parallel to each other at this particular situation. So in this particular game, this is just going to be, like kind of like a fun little casual situation. They're basically going to pretend shoot each other using ACMI equipment built into the ship kind of a thing. So depending on what your scenario states, it can control how fast you're going in one direction, how fast you're going in another direction, everything along those lines. So let's go ahead and continue here. So next what we would do if we were playing a normal game is we plot any pivot or roll. So in this particular case, since this is our first turn, keep in mind this is done simultaneously and separately. We wouldn't be able to see what's going on in his, he'd have his hand over it kind of a thing. So we're going to start at a complete standstill. So let's do a little bit of planning here. So we know that we can put a lot of firepower through our nose. If you actually take a look, not only can we put a lot of firepower through our nose, but we can actually put the most amount of firepower along our left side and along our right side. Here's the problem, and this is a big problem for us more than anybody, is the fact that these guys require action points to fire, which meant if we went to give him a full broadside, so to speak, which we totally can if he's pointing directly off of our side, we can, but it's going to suck up all our action points. So as of right now, I'm not really in a rush to get this ship moving, because if I get the ship moving, then all I'm going to be doing is making it so that the target itself shifts out of my usable targets. Meanwhile, coming over to cutter number 2 here, he realizes the fact that, yes, he can put quite a bit of firepower through his nose, but that's basically all the firepower he can put through his nose. If he wants to get a little bit extra, he's probably going to have to put some through the side, but he only has 2 action points to spend, which really eliminates his ability to put a complete alpha strike on our target. So for him, he's probably going to be most interested in basically making it so that he can keep his weakened shield sides, if he takes any damage, out of the way of incoming fire, as you'll see in just a second. So what I'm actually going to have him do is I'm going to have him accelerate. I'm not going to have him rotate. It is tempting to rotate a little bit, but rotating him is just going to be kind of funny. So I'm going to give him a little bit of speed, then turn him around, and then take some shots at this guy right here. So how do we do that? Let's go back to our card right here. So you can see the little thing up the top where it says Mode 1, add half the thrust and stuff like that. We're going to go ahead and take care of that in just a second. So let's go ahead and see what we can do. So what is his total thrust? He has up to 5 movement. If this were shaded, by the way, it would require an action point to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to accelerate in the direction of the nose. Always remember that. So that's a little weird. I have 5 thrusts, but I'm pointing at an edge. So how do I deal with that? Well, that's actually pretty easy. What we're going to do is we're going to come down here, and we're going to leave ourselves a little note as to what direction he's facing, which is BC. So this is the possible moves we can do. Now remember, he's using all 5 thrusts, which would mean we could move either 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 over, or we could do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 over to the left. We have to kind of decide what hex we're going to end up in. We're not going to worry about the vertical plotting grid yet, because remember, we're only facing forward and we're trying to keep this simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to opt to do this. So when he moves, keep in mind, however, you're not going to be moving there this turn because you have to accelerate to get to the speed. We're actually only going to be moving half of that. We're only going to be moving 2 this turn. And you'll see why, because you basically take your speed, have it, and round down. So his actual position is going to be here. However, he's going to be accumulating 2 thrusts in this direction and 3 thrusts in this direction. How do I know? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So that is what his new speed is going to be once we consolidate everything. So let's go ahead and see what the next instruction is. This will make sense in a second. Let's see. Plot vertical and horizontal move. I just did that. Record vector changes. Then we adjust end of turn marker for displacement thrust. So displacement is just a fancy term for the fact that as you accelerate over the course of a turn, half of your acceleration is going to end up physically moving you. So in this particular case, remember we picked that and it's going to be a 2 away, which is actually pretty straightforward for once. So we're going to take his end of turn marker and we're going to go 1, 2. So that's where he's actually going to end up at the end of this turn, even though he used 5 thrusts. You'll see how this kind of plays out in a second. This particular tool is a little bit more useful when you are using a different turn movement mode. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to consolidate all those vectors, record vector changes. Go ahead, take a quick look real quickly. Consolidate, record new vectors. Move to this, complete pivots and rolls. Okie doke. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go to the movement phase. So we're going to move to our end of turn marker. So that means this guy is going to move to here. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and bleed speed. We don't do anything like that. We consolidate and record the new vectors. Now we're moving, which means next turn we're actually going to be moving significantly farther than we did in this turn. We're going to move something like this, as you'll see in just a minute. So now this guy didn't pick up any movement, he didn't pick up any rotation, so he's just kind of chilling at this particular moment. So next what we like to do is record a new AVID orientation. Don't need to because nobody rotated. Then we simply place the end of turn marker for the current vectors and speed. So remember, this guy's moving now. So we want to take this and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Actually, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. Yes. So that is going to be his new position if he didn't apply any thrust at the end of the next movement phase. This guy, of course, like I stated, none of that changes. So let's go ahead and get to the fun part, which is putting holes in things. We're not having any fighters. We have no torpedoes or anything like that. So now we have to allocate AP for any attacks. So before I do that, I'm going to quickly shoot a bearing on this guy. So the question is, from this guy's perspective, where is this other ship? First of all, let's take a look at his range. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. He's 7 hexes away. So the way we figure this out is pretty straightforward. Is he through here? Is he through here? Or is he through here? So the standard is if you take 3 times the distance in this, 3 times the distance in the long way and compare it to the distance in the short way, if basically let me give you a better example before I confuse myself too. If this guy were 3 to the right and this length were 9, since he is 3 times, I should say 1/3 of the value of this direction, he is going to be in this edge. If his value is something like 4 and our value over here is 9, since 4 times 3 is 12 and is greater than 9, he would actually be in the hex edge. Whoa. So what does that mean for us? So basically, if you look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we're 5 in this direction, 2 in this direction. 2 times 3 is 6, which is greater than 5, which means when we're looking at him, we're going to be looking at him through the hex edge. So in this particular case, we know that he's 7 away, and he's in this edge, which is going to be very important in a minute. Now, if we come back this way, this is one of the cool things about this game, is that it's reciprocal. So that also means that he's 7 here. So I only have to do the math once. So what does that mean as far as our attacks go? Well, time to actually take a look at that, and this is where it gets complicated. So now we have to allocate action points. So I know where he is. So we're going to go ahead and map that real quickly. So he is 1 to the right of our port side. So if I find my port side and move 1 to the right, that puts him right there. Put him 1 to the right, puts him right there, and 1 to the right puts him right there. So we can actually only engage him with 1 set of weapons here. Coming over on this side, remember it's the opposite, so it is 1 to the right of the starboard side, or 1 closer to the tail. So if I find the starboard side, which is located right here, that's going to be the starboard side. Like I said, it's 1 closer to the tail. How do we know it's 1 closer to the tail? Because if you take a look, the tail is over here. And if you take a look at a little diagram, the tail is over here. If you want to think about this, actually wraps around. So if we go 1 to the right of the tail, that puts us right here. If we go 1 to the right of the tail, that puts it right here. If we go 1 to the right of the tail, it puts it right here, which means this is the only weapon. We have 2 AFBs, anti-fighter beams, in that arc. So I'm definitely going to be spending 2 of those to fire twice on basically fire both of those. You can also keep track of AP usage down here if you need to. Again, everybody does it differently. So in our particular case, we know that he's right here. He's definitely in range. He's barely in range, but he's in range. And we know that we can put AFBs and the SF into him. I'm not going to use missiles during this demonstration. So let's go ahead and engage him. We'll spend 1 of my APs to fire this guy right here. And the, of course, standard flak is out of range anyway, so we're going to get one shot in today. So that's basically all of my weapons fire. So I'm not going to do any ECM or anything along those lines. So now we plot fire. So my attack, of course, like I said, I'm just going to be engaging him. Basically, I'm going to try to get a trick shot into his back right corner. And then we need to go ahead and figure out things like, what arcs and stuff like that. So there's 3 different firing phases. We have defensive, which is first. We have kind of standard. And then, of course, we have reserve fire. We can hold weapons in reserve in case, somebody fires a missile early or something like that. So let's go ahead and roll for an attack. So how do you do an attack? It's pretty straightforward. You simply reach over here. You grab your dice. We figure out what his range is. We already found that his range is 7, which means on a 3 or greater, we will hit the target. This is the damage, and this is the penetration. That is a very, very weak weapon. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and roll these all together. That was a terrible roll. There we go. A little better. So our attack roll was an 8, which means the attack connects. Now, the next roll, which is a very interesting roll, is basically they call this a penetration roll. So the penetration roll, you take the bigger and subtract the smaller. So 10 minus 9 is going to be 1. Now that roll is limited by whatever the penetration number is here. Again, this is a terrible weapon. So at this particular range, it's limited by 1, which is convenient because we got a roll of 1. Damage is always 1. So what you do is you add the damage value to the penetration value limited by the pen variable. So in this case, damage is 1. Penetration is also 1. So the final dice determines where you're going to be hitting, which is location 0. So let's go ahead and map that over here. So now where does this actually hit? So keep in mind, this is the guy's nose up here. This is the guy's tail right here. This would be his left. This would be his right side. So if you remember, our shot is going to be hitting him just slightly to the rear of the right side. Now, if there's ever an issue where you can't decide which side we're actually hitting, you get to choose as the shooter. So in this particular case, it's very, very straightforward. We notice we're going to be hitting him somewhere in this arc. We're actually going to be hitting him basically right here. So we're going to be hitting him for 2 damage in location 0. So he has deflector shields, which are actually pretty cool. So what that means is you're going to subtract whatever amount of boxes you have from the incoming damage and then apply the rest of the shields and of the armor and everything like this. So in this particular case, this box reduces 1 of those points of damage. So that means 1 damage, and it's going to knock off 1 of these boxes here. So obviously this weapon was not designed as a capital weapon. This is basically, a little 50 caliber machine gun just kind of shooting up the side of something made out of steel. So it's not even going to do any damage here, even though it did hit the shields. So let's go ahead and see the reciprocal attack here. So now this guy's a little different. He spent 2 action points so he can fire 2 of his anti-fighter beams, which are located on this side. So he's still range 7, so he's still going to be rolling a 3. He's just going to be doing it twice. So let's go ahead and grab up the dice again. Go ahead and roll this. Go ahead and take a look how we did. So our accuracy roll was a 1, which means it just went wide. Maybe his gunner was blinded by that little anti-fighter beam that just clipped him a second ago. Let's go ahead and roll for his second attack. That's a 5. That's greater than 3, so it's a hit. Our penetration roll is 8, but remember, it's limited by 1. So our penetration roll is 1, plus the damage of 1 is going to give us 2 damage. And remember how I said it's a reciprocal attack. So in this particular case, the particular shot, if you want to look at it from this side, is basically going to be entering in through this corner, and it's going to be doing 2 damage. Since he does not have deflector shields, it's just going to be marking off 2 of these shields here, and it's not going to penetrate. Some weapons do penetrate and do things like that, but you can see we basically tickled each other and didn't really do a lot of damage. Obviously, using the missiles would be pretty effective, but like I said, I'd rather save that for another day because that can be a little bit of work to calculate. All right, so that's it for firing. I've got nothing else I can shoot from him. We have no reserve fire. We have nothing along those. We've gone ahead and done our damage. Remember, damage is simultaneous in each phase. So now we do some crew actions. We have cloaking devices, nope. Activating other equipment, nope. Boarding party combat, nope. Damage control, shield, and globe regeneration. Let's talk about shield regeneration. So we have 1 working shield regenerator at this particular time, and he produces up to 2 general points anywhere on the particular thing. The rule with general shield generations, if you have multiple of these, you can only use 1 of them for a particular heading. Sometimes you have directional shield generators, it just gets complicated. So in this particular case, I don't need any damage control. Damage control, like I said, gets a little complicated, but we'll deal with it a little later. So we're going to use use those two, and we're going to go ahead and instantly recharge our little shield that got damaged. Meanwhile, if we flip back over to this guy, he also has a 2 general shield regeneration, so he's going to completely regenerate all the damage he just took. Like I said, those deflector shields are pretty durable. So as you can see, that's not going to do much. So let's go ahead and tweak things a little bit here, and then we'll finish up. So if this were a normal turn, that's basically how that would have been evaluated. Like I said, these cutters are not really designed, to do much damage to each other. They're just there to kind of demonstrate. So let's go ahead and make things a little bit trickier, because we do want to see a little bit of damage allocation today. Let's say we had something like this now. Of course, he could be pointing in a direction different than he's moving in this particular case. We'll go more into that later. We have a range of 1, 2, 3, 4. And obviously, we'd come here. We'll go ahead and adjust this too, just to have a little bit of fun here, just for examples. Again, we're getting a little bit fancy here, but I want to make sure that you guys have a chance to see some of this. This new range would be 4. Go ahead and mark the right. Go ahead and mark his tail. There we go. Come over here. Woo. They're facing each other. Like I said, one of the coolest things is they can face each other but still be moving in a different direction, which is why space combat is like basically the Titanic but on ice. There we go. And we know, of course, the range is 4. Let's say we've regenerated all of our action points. This is a brand new turn, and we just want to dent each other up a little bit. So maybe we've done a gentleman's agreement to disable shields temporarily. So in this particular case, we can now unload everything into him this time. So we have the ability to fire both of our anti-fighter beams. We'll roll that in a second. And we can use our standard flak. We're at range 4. Ooh, that's not so good. Not the most useful weapon, but it's flak, so what do you expect? All right, let's go ahead and collect these guys. Again, this is just for an example. We're getting outside of our normal attack here, but we want to do some damage. We're going to assume that everybody shut their shields off in the front, just to make it kind of fun. Let's go ahead and come over here. We're going to shut our front shields off, again, just to make it fair. So we're going to attack with our anti-fighter beam first. Again, we need, at that range, we need a 3 or better. We got a 10. It's going to be 1. It's going to be 2 damage on location 4. 2 on 4, so he'd come over here like this. He'd find location 4, and he'd mark 2. So 1. This means wraps around. There's nothing here, which means we get this, which means now we've got to roll to see if we get a structural integrity hit. So structural integrity hit's pretty cool. You simply take a single dice, and you're going to roll it. And if the value of the damage left is less than that, then you're going to go ahead and take that. So in this case, it would be 4 damage, but remember, we only have 1 damage point left, so that means it's going to take 1 structural integrity. Run out of structural integrity, you explode. So that's it for that hit. So now he's going to attack with his other anti-fighter beam, of course. Again, these are not weapons designed for attacking things, so that's definitely a hit. That would be 4 for penetration, but it's limited to 1. So that's going to be 2 damage to location 4. We're going to go over here. Let's find location 4. So that means 2 damage gets through to structural integrity. That was a pretty clean hit. I have a feeling our buddy's about to get blown up here. So remember, no matter what this dice is, we can't do more than 2 damage. So just 2 more damage. Uh-oh. And we haven't even gotten to the flak weapons yet. Okay, let's see what happens this time. So now we're going to switch over to the flak. This is going to be a much tougher shot. We need a 6 or better on the red die to actually do any real damage here. All right, it's a 3. And that is a 6. Whoa, careful. So that is an 8. So that's going to be a 2. So it's going to be 4 damage. Nice. 4 damage to location 2. So let's go find location 2. So we knock off a hull box. We knock off 1. Notice we don't get both. 1, 2. Wraps around. Hey, lucky 3. 4 damage. So that strips him of quite a few weapons here. So it's going to knock 1 weapon off of his S1. It's going to knock, of course, 1 off his T-point as well. So that was pretty painful. So he's going to return fire because I'm mean. And let's see here. Again, we can only fire 2 of these because we only have 2 action points. We're not going to use the MX50 here. So for ranged, we need a 3-up, 1 and 1. That's probably not going to do very much, but we'll try. Keep in mind, damage is simultaneous, so these guys are actually pummeling each other. So damage doesn't take effect until later. So that's definitely a hit. That's going to be 2 damage to location 6. Let's go find location 6. 1. Oh, we lost the pivot thruster. 2. And this guy is going to be 2 damage to location 5. And I get to pick which one. Well, I'll get rid of the standard flak. And that would be the end of that, just so you could see it. If you run out of structural integrity points, you're blown up. Big ships, and I'm talking really, really big high displacement vessels, tend to get mission kills before they come apart. There's just too many structural integrity boxes. Obviously, if this guy took one more, he'd be removed from that, but like I said, this is a friendly thing. Okay, so that concludes this video. I'll break into the individual details of the actual movement and things like that a little later on. Just wanted to give you guys kind of a general idea of how these games are played, and just so you can see if you'd be interested. It's a little different on the tabletop. It tends to go a little bit quicker than with this, and 3D, of course, makes things a little more complicated, but it's still pretty cool. Enjoy.